Hi, everybody. Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got Sangeet, and we're going to be talking about his book, which is called Reshuffle: Who Wins When AI Restacks the Knowledge Economy. Fantastic book. Really enjoyed it. Sangeet, where can people find you?
Thank you, Tim. You can look up the book on Amazon, but to follow my work, and the best place to follow my work is my Substack, which is platforms.substack.com. I write about platforms, big tech, and more recently about what I've written in Reshuffle.
So, as I say, it's a great book. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
As you've already seen, I've written a couple of blogs off the back of it. There's some great stuff in there. And certainly from some of those blogs, I know that some people have gone away and actually bought copies. Just talk to us about what your inspiration was for the book.
Yeah, the book sort of came out of wanting to respond to the widely binary views that people have about AI, and a lot of it is not very nuanced. It's either all good or AI is going to take our jobs away. And so I wanted to kind of create a more nuanced perspective and set up some frameworks that people could discuss about this more holistically. The two things that I specifically call out as the underlying frameworks for most of my arguments in the book. The first is that we often think about the impact of AI as happening just at the level of tasks. AI takes away tasks or improves tasks. My point is it's not just that. The tasks that we perform sit inside workflows. Those workflows sit inside organizations. Those organizations compete in industries and ecosystems, which then sit inside economies. And AI changes things at all of these levels. So if you really want to understand what impact it will have on a workflow or a job, you really need to think about the impact at all of these different levels. So the first point is don't look at the task, but look at the system. And the second thing that I, kind of highlight quite a bit is that just because, it's not just positive or negative. I agree with the techno optimists that the pie is going to become larger because of AI. It's not zero sum, but just because the pie is going to get larger doesn't mean it'll be split equally. And so a lot of the arguments that I put there are about the types of tensions that will emerge when AI comes in, and how that will lead to new forms of inequality or new forms of competitive tensions, because of which the pie will be split in unequal ways.
Yeah, you talk about reshuffling the economy because, and you make a great point about that it's not that things shouldn't be task based. So you talk about how that you got a great metaphor about how the French decided to build this long fortified set of turrets and stuff all the way down their border with Germany. And Germany just basically had what they had, the Blitzkrieg, and they used to, even though that the tanks and the people and the planes were still exactly the same technology, they had a communication where they were able to communicate down at a very low level. So what you had was two different technologies, and one technology was right at the time, but the other technology basically overtook them, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The reason I took the example from warfare is that today we are surrounded by technological shifts, because of which we don't just see better ways to play today's game. We see ways to reinvent the rules of the game. We see fundamentally new ways to compete in an industry. So a simple example being, when GPS technology became widely available for civilian use, it was initially used as a way to create personal navigation devices. So you were monetizing navigation, but then Google flipped the whole thing. It subsidized navigation, which is actually very expensive to create, but it provided that below cost, and then created an entire ecosystem around Android because of the advantage that it had with Google Maps. So Google, in that sense, kind of changed the rules of the game. And the reason I took the French versus German example was because through much of the previous century, when we had this stable industrial system of manufacturing and distribution, there were very few changes to the rules of the game. But one of the best examples of changes to the rules of the game is what you see between World War I and World War II, where World War I was primarily based on the logic of trench warfare.
Yep.
And the logic of trench warfare then suggested that if you wanted to protect yourself, you just needed to build this really strong wall between France and Germany, and the parts through Belgium, through the Ardennes forest, which were which were difficult to pass through, were anyway not amenable to trench warfare. But then, what ended up happening, as you also surmised over here, is that with improvement in radio communication, you did not need to go in the traditional trench warfare model. You could coordinate across multiple different forms of attack at the same time, and so you could penetrate that forest very effectively. And that's the key point that I'm trying to make, that when technological shifts happen, as it did with Germany adopting radio communication, you can reorient the system, you can change the rules of the game, you can figure out new ways to coordinate different parts of an economic system and create fundamentally new value. And that's the big opportunity that we have with AI today. But if we keep thinking about it at the level of tasks, we'll be stuck building better machine guns for trench warfare, whereas the other players who are actually getting it right would have figured out a new way to do blitzkrieg. So that's the key point that I try to make over there.
And really, you get this point across, don't you? That we're so obsessed with AI and task, and what we're going to do is we're going to replace a task with AI, whereas actually we should be thinking about the system. Or you talk about the fact that we actually should be sitting there thinking, can we actually do this some completely other way?
That's right. Yeah, I think one of the key differences between thinking in terms of tasks and thinking in terms of systems is that whatever we do, the work that we do or the workflows we perform or are part of are not just a set of or a sequence of tasks. It's also, in addition to the tasks that we perform, we're also managing certain constraints in the system, certain challenges that the system has, because of which the system actually rewards us. And I give an example of this. When the word processor was first invented, before the word processor, typing was a separate job. So typists were a separate role who primarily typed out documents, but even though their job description was typing, and so you would think it's about the task, the real reason that role existed was not to perform the task, but to solve the constraint at that time, which was expensive document editing, because all of this was typewritten, and so the cost of editing and redoing documents was very high. And once word processors removed that constraint, the task of typing got distributed across everybody else. So technology did not remove the task, but it still removed the role, because it was not the task that defined the role, even though we call them typists and not editors, but it was the constraint of editing that defined the role. So my point is that look around yourself. How is the system changing? What old constraints are going away? What are the new constraints that are coming up? That's where you'll find real clues to how to change when AI starts changing the system around you.
We've seen platforms reshape industries. If we think like Uber and Airbnb, how will AI platforms differ in the way that they disrupt incumbents?
I think one of the key, I would say that there are two key differences over here in terms of how we think about the evolution of platforms alongside the improving capabilities of AI. The first is that all platforms rely on, platforms fundamentally are a way to organize any system of actors, right? So Uber, Airbnb, they're organizing supply and demand and new market interactions. But in order to do that, they need to map out that system. So Uber needs to know where the drivers are, which cars are available. So they need to create that representation of reality. Same thing with Airbnb, same thing with any platform that you take. Flexport has a logistics platform, for instance. What AI does is, with improvements in AI, we're changing what can be mapped and hence what can be coordinated around that representation of reality. So in the past, you could not map, for example, information that was not heavily codified, information that was stuck in PDFs and photos and drawings and so on. But today with AI, you can potentially extract the relevant information from all of those unstructured formats, create structured representations from that, and then coordinate actors around that. So the first thing is a lot of the parts of the economy which could not be coordinated by platforms because they could not be standardized in the form of simple listings and simple interfaces. We will now see the power of platforms moving into those parts of the economy. I take the example of the construction industry, where a lot of work is not done inside software, and even when it's done, the different software players don't talk to each other, and so there's a lot of fragmentation. There's a lot of work done in over email, on calendar scheduling, etc. But all of that can be fed into an AI system, and new representations of a project can be created to coordinate players around that. So that's the first difference that sort of comes in. And the second difference is in the very logic of how a platform creates value. And a good example to understand that is the difference between Instagram and TikTok. Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all the first generation, or the dominant generation social networks which came out in the early 2010s, were built around the idea of a social graph. You had to build connections between people before the feed could be populated. TikTok used AI to completely change the logic, do away with the social graph, and create what we now call a behavior graph instead. So it used to, it would create what a graph of your interests based on how you were interacting with content, and that's how it would populate the feed. And so that's what really helped TikTok kind of um, unseat incumbents which had massive network effects, because everybody was expecting that those incumbents would not be unseated because nobody would be able to replicate the social graph, and TikTok fundamentally changed that. So those are the two factors, the way you represent what can be coordinated, and the very mechanism through which a platform works. AI can, with AI coming in, both those things are constantly shifting boundaries.
You also talk in the book, don't you, about how the world will become where you live above or below the algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk to us about that?
Yeah, I wanted to call that out because one of the things that we don't talk about enough, or when we talk about the impact of AI on jobs, we talk about AI is doing this task in a human-like way and so on. But there's a separate aspect that's progressing alongside that, and that is that a lot of job markets, or markets in which work is getting done, are getting mediated by algorithms, and algorithms are sort of the new managers, if you will. And a simple way to think about it is, ride hailing and food delivery, clearly managed in terms of the job that's allocated to you, how much it's priced at, how much you get to earn. It's all algorithmic. But even if you look at how performance reviews are done in large organizations today, and how candidates are ranked, algorithmic decision making is coming into every part of work. And so my point is that the more we start modularizing work, and that's what we do when we think in terms of tasks and AI's impact on tasks. We start seeing this part of the job can be done by AI, this part is left to the human, and that is now a very modular role where they are assisted by AI, and hence uh, the more modular a role becomes, and the more we start seeing a leveling effect with AI, in the sense that the less qualified or less skilled workers also perform at the level of more skilled workers. There are many studies that have shown that that happens. The more we see that leveling effect, the more that market of work becomes amenable to algorithmic coordination, as we saw with delivery drivers and ride hailing, where arguably the availability of Google Maps created that leveling effect. You did not need to know the roads, off the top of your head. You could just follow Google Maps for navigation, so anybody could be a driver. So what happens then is, when you start having work managed by algorithms, you're creating a distinction between two classes of workers or players. There are those who design the algorithm, which are essentially baking in and setting the rules of how work is to be managed. And then there are those who are working below the algorithm. So the above the algorithm players are really managing these systems of work through which work is getting done, and the below the algorithm players are managing individual modular tasks. What that does is it actually widens the gap between capital and labor. Labor becomes increasingly more commoditized. The more it's augmented by technology, the more commoditized it gets, the less it can charge a premium. On the other hand, the more labor can be algorithmically coordinated, the more leverage the about the algorithm data scientist or platform designer has. And that worker, even though we call them a worker, they are now closer to becoming a capitalist because they have that level of leverage that they benefit from. So that's the key distinction that I bring over here, that it's not so much a labor versus capital distinction anymore, as much as it's an above the algorithm versus a below the algorithm distinction. And as the most important point here, though, is that as AI improves, you could be above the algorithm today, but you could move below the algorithm tomorrow because AI just levels the playing field in what you do.
And do you think that there's where are we in terms of a role for humans, their judgment, creativity, decision making, that sort of say, and do you see humans losing ground at all?
I think I think all progress since the beginning of time has been because of human ingenuity. Even when we've had technological advancements, the gains of technological advancements have been evenly spread out, or the skill premium associated with using technology has sort of withered pretty quickly. So human ingenuity always has a place. What we are seeing, though, is that we've sort of lived through these decades of very stable jobs, very stable work, where we have not necessarily applied ourselves to asking, how do I redefine my role? How do I rethink based on how the system is changing? So I believe that humans have a very special place if they can move beyond the constraints of how they're thinking about things today, the boundaries of how they perceive their work, and really think about, what's the system in which I'm playing, and how is value shifting within this. If I'm working for a company, is the company still competing on the old basis? What questions is the company facing, and hence what does that mean for the organization? How can I then proactively shift what it means for me in terms of my role? So I think we'll need to be a lot more proactive, and mindful about how we design our work, not just our progression and path. And that's something that's new for a lot of people. And I would, I mean, while there's going to be a lot of displacement in the current frame, those of us who think about things in the new frame will actually be in a good place. And I talk about, three specific things that are uniquely human, which become more valuable in the age of AI. One is that we feel that AI can do everything, but the fact that it does everything starts creating a premium on choosing the right things to do and the right outputs to elevate and exclude. And so curiosity, or asking the right questions, when you can easily generate answers, is very important, because just because you can easily generate answers might mean that you end up down the wrong rabbit hole as well. So curiosity is very important. Curation is important. What's valuable, what's not, what should be elevated versus what should be excluded of the answer set that's being generated. And finally, having judgment and having the ability to assume the risk associated with a choice will always be either human, or it will have to be pooled in a way that it gets taken over by a pooled mechanism like insurance. But for that's not going to apply to a lot of risk. A lot of our daily tasks will just have a lot of our daily work will still involve a human to take over that risk. And as long as that human role combines that risk with economically valuable work, that would be a powerful place for them to be in.
Yeah. So, what advice would you give to a CEO right now in terms of what do they do?
I think the first thing that CEOs should be thinking about is, instead of looking inward in terms of how can AI help me cut costs, how can AI help me improve my cost structure, which is where a lot of the narrative is headed right now. CEOs should rightfully be looking at, how does AI change the rules of competition in my industry? How does it change the boundaries and definition of my industry? What new forms of competitors come in which would not have been there in the past? And hence, how should I rethink capital allocation? Because the job of a CEO is to really generate that those growth and returns rather than just cut costs in the short term. And so instead of looking at operational advantages that AI brings in, a CEO should be thinking about, here's an opportunity where the technology is shifting. What's a structural advantage that I can create, which can last for a few years? And how can I then build on it as technology improves even further? And any changes to the organization should be in response to that. The problem is today we are going inside out. We're starting with what jobs can we cut? What does that mean for the rest of the jobs in the organization? And then we're saying, okay, now that we've got this new leaner organization, what can we do better? We should be coming at it from the outside in, and then see. I'm not saying that it does not mean that you do that it ends up with jobs not being cut. I'm sure there will be impact on jobs, but you are now starting with understanding what it takes to compete, and you are making all your decisions within that frame.
Yeah, I can see from what you're saying in terms of the book, where the fact that we're so obsessed with AI replacing tasks, it's old thinking, isn't it?
That's right.
Rather than actually thinking about the whole system. And when you're talking about a system, it's not just about the company that we're working in, but our partners, our competitors, and new entrants as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's you need to rethink every aspect of your business given the realities of AI. Yesterday's partners could be tomorrow's competitors, and completely, today's competitors could be tomorrow's partners. So the rules of the game are completely up for grabs when technology changes something so structurally.
Sangeet, thank you so much for coming in and talking about your book, Reshuffle: Who Wins When AI Restacks the Knowledge Economy. If we wanted to buy a copy, we can get one from Amazon, I guess.
That's right. Yes.
And remind people of what your Substack is.
It's called platforms.substack.com.
Okay, excellent. And thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed the book. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And I know from the articles I've written, I've had such amazing feedback. And as I've sent you messages, people have been going, just off the back of this, I'm going to buy the book. So I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic read. It really makes you think about the way that AI is going to change the world.